In this video, I'm going to be talking about how humanity was able to cope and explain as best as possible why everyone is so different and why some people have such different callings than others. That divide between everyone that makes us all unique is something that is crucial for humanity and especially for the arts. Now, I do not consider myself religious, but I think that the religion and Carmelite spirituality played a crucial role in preserving this inspiration for how everyone is so unique and divinely inspired at such a young age sometimes. Now, I think religion was needed in order to preserve it into contemporary times, because back when these ideas were first conceptualized, there was no scientific fact able to back it up. There just wasn't technology around back then. Now we have a much diverse and still growing psychological understanding of how the mind works, and we can dismiss a lot of these doctrines saying God wants you to do A, B, C, and D, and you can't deviate from it, and all these other rules and ideas that were needed to preserve this concept. We can now just go right to the concept, because instead of having these doctrines and religious beliefs and practices that were needed to preserve the truth, we have a different way of preserving the truth, and that's through our understanding of psychology. We can see how core essence of Carmelite spirituality is still extremely important to us today. Now, I want to go back a little bit, and specifically to your childhood. Now, in my childhood, I did a lot of different things. I did a lot of creative things. I liked to write books as soon as I learned how to write the smallest amount of words, and draw pictures and make jewelry and just create things, mix things together, just experiment. I never was fascinated with action figures. I was very briefly interested in video games, but it never grasped me like I see some people did and influence their childhood as much. And you could say, okay, so-and-so was influenced by an early age because of these influences. So like for my example, you could say, okay, I'm studying to be an artist because I went to art school when I was younger. And before that, my parents encouraged the creativity and gave me lots of opportunities and supplies to make things and explore my creativity with. But then if you keep going back and back and you think, well, why was I creative? Why was I wanting to make things? Well, because I had those things. Why did I have those things? Because my parents provided them, because they saw that interest in me. And why did I have that interest? You just keep going back and back until at one point it was that you had A, B, and C, and you choose B, and there was no reason for choosing B. You just picked it, and you had no outside influence. You just had this, you just were drawn towards something. You had this divine calling that pulled you toward something versus the other. And everything, all decisions in your life was based off of that. You choose to do one thing over the other, it will influence how you do the next thing after that, and it will just keep spiraling further and further and further. And so when you were as young as you could actually make a decision, and you picked one thing over the other, your whole life was being shaped by that. For someone who chose to start exploring role-playing and putting yourself into an action figure or a scenario or a world, versus creating a world, versus exploring the world. And there's all these little decisions. And once you're pulled toward one at a really young age, every decision you make is based off of that. Because you're inspired by dance, and you start to find yourself really attracted to ballet dancers, and you find that a passion that you really like, then you can start taking classes. And then that influences the way you look at the world, and everything around you starts changing in that way. But it ultimately comes down to, what was that first initial calling? And why did you choose that first calling that based everything after it on that? The Carmelite spirituality has a concept for trying to go back to that original calling. And they do that by extreme isolation from the world and a variety of different exercises and practices to try to eliminate that outside influence and bring you back to that that divine inspiration, that first pull that pulled you into that direction to better understand yourself. Now, every religious order in Christianity has a overarching figure that governs their religious body. And for Carmelites, it is predominantly Saint Elijah. And Elijah is found in the Bible. The story of Elijah is extremely important because it expresses the universal purpose and the universal understanding of where we can find that divine inspiration. And the story basically goes that Elijah is in a God fight with these secular kings, and they have a big God duel, and Elijah's God beats the false prophet's gods, and it's this whole dramatic scene. But after Elijah wins the battle, they threaten to kill him, basically. Causes him to flee for his life, pretty much. And so he goes and he leaves his servant behind. He's all alone. He's wandering a day, and he just lies down and he just pretty much gives up. He's like, I'm going to die. They're going to find me. They're going to kill me. I might as well just stop going now. And then an angel came to him, gave him food, and told him to keep going. And he does this again. And then after that, he has the power to climb Mount Sinai for 40 days. So he climbs up this mountain for 40 days, and he finally gets to the top. His hope is to find God at this top of this mountain, to seek help, because he helped him win this battle, and now his life's being threatened, and he wants to figure out what's going on and how he can keep following what is true, the truth, the divine purpose in his life. And so he's climbing up this mountain, and he's all alone, and he's isolated from the rest of the world. And finally, he gets to the very top of the mountain, and he seeks refuge in a cave, and he waits for God to speak to him and give him the revelation that he needs to keep going. That night, a huge windstorm came, and it was cracking rocks, and it was blowing mountains over. Elijah was looking around, and God wasn't there. And then the next day, there was earthquake, and it just decimated everything. And still, God was not there. And then on the third day, there was a fire. And in the fire, there was a little whisper. And that whisper, he knew was God. That is the essential principle of Carmelite spirituality. It's calming yourself, meditating until your body and soul is still enough to be able to hear that whisper. The whole Carmelite spirituality is based that God is not this giant, powerful being, but it's this subtle thing that if you don't calm yourself and you're not still enough to it, you're never going to be able to understand it. So the whole Carmelite spirituality is based around tune in with this little whisper on the mountain. Now, I think Carmelite spirituality is like Elijah going up on the mountain, but that's not how the story ends. Elijah comes off the mountain and continues his divine purpose in life. And I think if we go as too far as to join a Carmelite life and basically cut off the rest of our life from anything besides staying on the mountain, if we never leave the mountain, why are we going to the mountain in the first place? So I think that's where Carmelite spirituality falls short, is, not Carmelite spirituality, but a Carmelite life or a Carmelite religious order, is that they never leave this mountain. And in order to fulfill that divine purpose, you have to take what you learned from that mountain through that divine whisper and bring it into your being and take it on with you further throughout your life. I think we can get some very helpful information by listening to this subtle whisper, but we shouldn't isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. So we are one with the whisper, but we can't manifest anything in reality to fill our purpose. So that whisper, that divine whisper in our life, is that first pull, that unconscious pull at a very young age, where we start to gravitate toward writing books or making jewelry or looking at plants and flowers, or even having a fascination with dinosaurs. That little pull that when we trace back enough, it's just that we just gravitated toward it. We just were pulled that way with no outside influence. We had a variety of choices and we chose that one, and that was it. And if we look back into that initial pull in our life, in our childhood, before we had expectations, before we had obligations and influences and peers, where were we pulled to? Now, in my life, I see myself being pulled. I was always pulled toward creating art. It wasn't studying Bargs and cast drawings when I was 3 years old, but it was looking at life and looking at plants and finding bugs and animals fascinating and creating things and just trying to understand how the world worked as much as possible. And it doesn't surprise me that it pulled me in that direction where my whole life has been influenced by it. But I think for some people that doesn't always happen that way, where you can start to get pulled in one direction, but then all of a sudden you'll get hit off kiltered and you'll start going in a direction that is perpendicular or not in unison with that divine pull. And if you think back to your childhood and these pulls, these choices that brought you into one direction, that prior to you being knocked off track into doing whatever you're doing now, what was that like before you were pulled in a different direction than the one you started out with? And I think it's by understanding our childhood as least amount of bias as possible that we're able to really tune in to that whisper that is so evident in our life, because we don't have all these superficial dead wood that we build around ourselves as we get older. We are pure. We're in as purest and simplest form, where that divine inspiration is easier to see because there's less things surrounding it that builds up over time. Some for the good, some for the bad. But that key, that essence of life is there, and it's easier to see the pull because you know that you're not going one direction because your 1-year-old friend is going that direction, or because your parents think it would be a better career choice when you're 3 years old. You don't understand that. You just understand what drives you. And I think that's so important to understand if you're on the right path, if you're going in this right direction. And the Carmelites were very in tune with understanding that the purpose in life is not a giant neon light, but it's this very subtlety, this very small and weak wind that is always there, but it's so quiet and it's so subtle that if you are not perfectly silent and in tune with it, you're never going to be able to find it, even though it's always right in front of you.